however, is very relative. Right? Point to the right, you know. You're pointing this way, I'm pointing that way, and we're both right if we consider perspective. Okay? Now, I can clarify point to my right, and then you'd have to point in the same direction, so I can say point to your right. My point is, I planted this seed when speaking of global and local references. I planted this seed when I talked about the concept of lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. But that is a fixed reference, but it's not always fixed. It's relative. It's locally referenced. If you consider it this way, most screws and caps have only one part that can move. You know, if you're screwing in a hose to your house, probably there's only one part that's going to move. So you get, spoiled is the wrong word, you get used to global referencing when you're spinning things. Because you're not going to spin the house, right? I gave the example about the door, how the door can rotate like this and we call it open. But because bourgeois is never going to rotate like this, we only get it from one perspective, and then we accept it as global, meaning that it's always the case, it's never going to change. The human body is not like a house. The human body is not like bourgeois. The human body can move one part or move the other part. With me so far? So what I'm saying is that if we hold on to the concept of lefty-loosey, yeah, that works sometimes. And in this case, if I spin the cap lefty-loosey, I'm opening the bottle. That's like a motion, open, flexion, extension, open, close. However, I could spin the bottle righty and still have the same motion, open. Does that make sense? Another way to look at it is, I'm spinning the cap lefty, but that's only because I'm looking at it on the top. If I look at it from the bottom, guess what? I'm spinning it righty, and it's still open. So here's what I'm getting to. The first motion of the knee is going to be super duper easy, getting you in the fetal out of fetal. Flexion, extension, flexion, extension. Let's see, this is a left, flexion, extension. Now, I can move one segment about the other, or I can move the other segment about the first one, right? Flexion, extension, flexion, extension. I get the same change, I get the same motion. The harder one, the more difficult to see, only because our whole lives that bell's been ringing, we've been salivating, is that the knee is not a true hinge joint. The knee is a modified hinge. In fancy terms, they call it a trocho, it's Latin for modified geniculus joint, modified hinge joint. The reason it's modified is because unlike the elbow, I'm going to teach you, this is not elbow. You have a specialized rollover joint called the radial-ulnar joint that does this. The elbow is only allowed to move in its sagittal plane. The elbow is only allowed to do this. This happens not at the elbow, but a different joint. Okay. The knee, however, is allowed to move a little bit, more than none, less than most, a little bit, in its transverse plane, but only when the knee is flexed. You have to get it out of anatomical. You have to unlock it, as we call it in athletic training. Meaning that when the knee is in anatomical position, you have those co-lateral side ligaments, very taut. They keep it in place. You also have these condyles, right? These articulations, these little peninsulas that kind of lock into place. It's like it really kind of fits this. It's like when my knuckles are kind of interlocked into place. And then when I flex my knee, guess what? I unlock those articulations. The collateral ligaments are a little posterior in nature, so when I flex, I put those on slack. And when I unlock my knee, it allows for some rotation. And there's a reason for that. And the biggest reason for that is when we go to change direction, or in layman's terms, cut and plant, right? If I want to cut and then change direction, go this way, cut, change direction, go that way, like, I don't know, Alvin Kamara. One of the ways you get more force from the ground, because remember, you don't move yourself, the ground moves you. You could be the strongest, most powerful athlete in the world. If you're trying to do athletic events on ice, you may not be as efficient as if you were on a court. Or you're sliding everywhere on the court, you can't move, so what do? You sweep the court, get the surface, right? It's all about the surface. So my point is that the more you can push down on the ground, the more you interlock your feet with the ground, the more friction you can develop to thus influence your motion. It's really, really hard, unless you are a wizard or a Jedi, to supply more compression on the ground when you are in an anatomical position. The only way I can really push more on the ground is to get up on my toes. But when my knees are flexed, then I can use the muscles at my knees and my hip to push more on the ground, to interlock those two surfaces so that I can then get more friction to move myself around. That's the concept of the cut and plant, is so that you can push more to thus get more in return. It's hard to cut and plant with a straight leg. You can't, when your leg knee is extended and hip is in anatomical position, you can't push anymore on the ground. So what happens is, your knee naturally is going to unlock so that you can push more on the ground. And then when you rotate in a transverse plane, you better have a little motion to give or your knee is going to rip apart every time. And sometimes it still rips apart. But the point is that we need that extra motion in our knee so that we can cut, plant, change direction. Skyscrapers sway to dissipate force, because if they didn't, they would crumble. What you gain in stability, you lose in mobility. But we sometimes give mobility so that we can dissipate force and we don't have more injuries. Okay? So, our knee allows some rotation. When my distal segment, does everybody know what proximal and distal is? Proximal, more on top, distal further away in layman's terms. Distal is just the further away. And it's all relevant, right? My humerus is distal to my scapula, but it's proximal to my radius and all, right? Those are locally referenced concepts. When my distal segment is free, rotation looks like this. This is not happening at my foot and ankle. Now, my foot and ankle may move, but I could be in a boot or a cast, right? I could be in a cast where I couldn't move it if I tried and still do this. I mean, you can see I actually had surgery on my tibial tuberosity. That's where your quad tendon pulls. Because I had a real bad Osgood-Schlatter growing up. It used to stick out like a Pinocchio nose. But you could literally see my shin moving. If this was just ankle and subtalar, you wouldn't see my shin going anywhere. This is what's happening. Okay? Now, my ankle and subtalar move too, but that's at different place. It's only because my foot's saying, oh, you must be trying to get your foot as far over here as possible. Let me help you out. It's no different than if you were trying to raise your arm, and let's say you couldn't abduct any further. You can help out in other places. I could bend my trunk, I can move my hips, right, to get it higher. So that's why naturally your ankle and foot want to move, because basically you're saying, hey, bring my toes in. Oh, I can help with that. knee rotation. Now let's talk about what's the name of the two ways that the knee can rotate. And this is where it comes back to the first part of the lecture. We have to give it a name, but the name is locally referenced. It is not globally referenced. Your instinct is going to want to make it global. Your instinct is going to want to make it global. If I asked a small child, who works with children? Anybody work with children? Okay. If you asked a kid to do a front roll, I think they would know what that means. Back roll, I think they know what that means. Maybe not your kid. What about if I asked them to do a cartwheel to their right? Do you think they would? What kind of kids you working with? Oh, well, that makes sense. Bless their hearts. Okay? Even if they didn't do it, if I asked them to visualize it, okay? So in their minds they can do it. So if I asked them to do a front roll, I think they would visualize what a front roll would be, right? Or what a back roll would be. Or I think they could visualize what a cartwheel to your right would mean. Or a cartwheel to your left would mean. Now, that's sagittal plane functional task and a frontal plane functional task. So what about a transverse plane functional task? If I asked them to visualize what it would be to spin to your right, maybe we loaded them on a special. That's one thing I love about Disney World, man. They accommodate for all handicaps, disabilities, and we can put their wheelchair in a merry-go-round that spins them around. And so we'd say, okay, how do you want to spin? And I think they would say, well, spin me to my right. I think that would be a good inference that I'm spinning to my right, spinning to my left. Did I look elegant? Years of non-training. We have rights and lefts, but our right does not have a right and left. And my left does not have a right and left. This is the right, this is the left. So what's the right of a right, a left of a right, a left of a left, a right of a left? Lateral, medial. That's what that is. This side of a side. This side of a side. So if I'm talking about my whole body, I could say spin to my right and spin to my left. But if I'm talking about the right side, I got to have a different term for it. Hey, right shoulder, spin laterally. Hey, right shoulder, spin medially. Hey, right shoulder, spin externally. Spin internally. That's what that means. So lateral rotation would be similar to spin to your right, spin to your left. Hey, shoulder, spin laterally to the lateral side, spin medially to the medial side. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, of course, they're mirrored concepts, so we have to look at them as double doors. We have to say, hey, the left door spins one way globally, and the right door spins the other way globally, but locally they're both doing the same thing. They're both opening, closing. They're both spinning laterally, although globally we see two different spins. Locally they are the same. Now, how does that apply to the knee? It applies the same way to the knee. Hey, right knee, spin laterally. Hey, right knee, spin medially. Hey, left knee, spin laterally. Left knee, spin medially. You see how it's like the double doors? Lateral rotation, medial rotation. Open, close. Now, lateral is synonymous with external, with dealing with rotation. I want you to know both because they're used probably, I'd say, half of the time equally in clinics and in practice. External rotation, synonymous with lateral rotation. Medial rotation, synonymous with internal rotation. Yes, sir?
Is that only with rotational movements that they're synonymous?
And that's a question I could spend a lot of time on. For now, yeah. Lateral, medial. Lateral, medial. Now, this is both of them, right? So I technically have to say bilateral knee, external or lateral rotation. Bilateral knee, internal or medial rotation. Right knee, lateral or external. Right knee, medial, internal. Left knee, lateral, external. Left knee, lateral, internal. Medial, internal. Which one? Because they don't have to do the same thing, right? And look at how confusing this could be to someone who doesn't come to class and doesn't listen to it. Someone would easily mistake it and say, oh, it's like windshield wipers. They're doing the same motion because they make it a global reference. You see how easy that could be to miss? Hey, they're both going to this side of the class. Oh, look, they're both going to that side of the class. They must be doing the same thing. You see how easy that could be? And then when they miss it, they blame this guy for being tricky. Guys, human motion is tricky, unless you understand it. It can be tricky. But I'm here to wash away the trickiness. So this is actually doing the same thing, not this. That would be like saying, are my shoulders doing the same thing? Globally, yeah, but joint motions are locally based. They're not globally based. All right, that's the easy part. This is the easy part. Okay, but remember, a joint, any joint is an illusion. A joint technically isn't a thing, it's a concept. The joint is formed by the articulation of two things, or more than two things, but bones. So I could have external, internal, external, internal, external, internal, and I gave it its name distally. And you may say, well, that's fair or unfair. I don't care. We gave the concept of lefty-loosey to a certain segment, knowing full well that I can move the other segment in the other direction globally and have the same motion. So we give the name distally, spin lateral, spin medial. However, I can definitely have the same change in motion by moving the proximal and about the distal. And this is where some people's worlds fall apart. And it's not your fault. It's your instinct. Your instinct wants everything on the right side that spins this way to be what you're comfortable with. And your body wants everything on the left side that spins that way to also be what you're comfortable with. And what I'm here to show you is the illusion of keeping the distal segment fixed. And when I move the proximal segment, and it looks like it's spinning medially, the motion is actually lateral. And I'm going to give you a lot of different ways to see it. Okay? If knowing Lafayette is home, anatomical position, home base, if you closed your eyes and wound up in Lake Charles, you knew you had to travel west, right? But what if you didn't even realize it? You just woke up, and you're like, man, where am I? You were sleeping, traveling, sleeping. And you say, oh, I'm in Lake Charles, so I didn't even know I was moving west, but I know I'm in a position of west. How would I have to go back home? How would I have to go back to where I started? Wouldn't I have to travel east to go back home? So then we can infer that I had to travel west to go away from home. And you better not be, what if you flew all the way around the world? All right? If you know how you have to move to go back, you can infer how you had to move to go away. Notice I did not say assume. Infer means you took information into account. So watch this. Anatomical position. Yeah? My knee is flexed. All right. Then I do this. I'm in a new position. Now, here in the transverse plane, I'm still in anatomical. Transverse plane. I didn't spin or anything yet. Then I did this. Now watch what Campbell does here. Yeah, I'm going to need some help. I'm getting old. How would I have to rotate my knee to go back home? Did we call that medial or internal rotation? So how did my knee have to rotate to go away from home? Lateral or external rotation? Because this is a lateral or external rotation of the knee when you're cutting and planting. Aha! And the reason it's tough to hold on to is because I just said, when it's open, lateral medial, lateral medial, lateral medial. So then when my femur appears to go medial, your instinct is to say medial. I saw a bone do this. That's not how it works. It's a locally referenced concept. Open, 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 open. So it makes sense. If the bottle can open by moving the cap this way or the bottle the other way, then the same thing can happen here. External is when I move the bottle one way, but the same external is when I move the cap the other. If both of them rotated the same, it would never open. If the cap and the bottle both rotated the same way globally, I'd never drink. Do you see what I mean? They have to be in opposition. They must be in opposition to have the same change. Hey, cap and bottle spin laterally. They would never move. Okay? Right knee, external rotation. Right knee, internal rotation. Left knee, external rotation. Here's another way to look at it. When my knee is in its anatomical in the sagittal, then when I flex it, it's still in its anatomical in the transverse, meaning I didn't spin yet. But my patella is somewhat lined up with my tibial tuberosity. It's where my quad's blowing out. Okay? So watch this. Externally rotated. So basically what I did is I started from the reference of the patella, then I slid down to the reference of the tibia. Now, when your knee is flexed, your patella becomes synced with your femur. When you flex your knee, it's really pulled into that groove. The only way the patella is going to leave that groove is if you dislocate your patella. When you're in anatomical position, it can kind of float on there. You play around with your patella, slid it around. But when you flex your knee, that sucker is grooved in. That train is on the track, and it's not coming out unless there's a bad day. Let me do it on the left. Externally rotated. Okay? So if I was like doing the Tootsie Roll, I know it's stupid, but that's from back in my day. But you would have some rotation allowed in your knees. That would be Internal or external at the knee. Remember, guys, you may say, well, what about the hip? I'm not disrespecting the hip, we just haven't gotten to the hip yet. That's for another conversation. So I'm not saying that your hips can't spin in, but while your hips spin in, guess what happens to your knees? Your knees spin out. Your knees are externally rotated here. I think I have some examples in the book. I tried to use like some little dots right there. Okay. Now, you may say, maybe you're wondering, you're like, well, wait, I thought transverse plane is, this. Well, for the knee, we reference it to the tibia. So in other words, the tibia is going to be in its long bone plane. But even when the femur does this, we're looking at the polar axis as it comes through the knee joint. In other words, we're not looking at the polar axis here. We're still looking at the polar axis there. So that's why this is the same as this. Because it's about that. This will be because of this. That'll be because of hip stuff. It's my go-to when everybody's sleeping. So you can almost kind of look at the kneecap as kind of like, a little top there. Questions? Clarifications? Bless you. Yes, sir?
Couldn't you still have external rotation of like your lower leg while your hip is still also opening up, or is it always opposition?
And please note, this response is just low. You do not rotate a limb. Lower leg doesn't mean anything to us. It may mean something to my dad, but that should never be used. Now, if you say, can you still what externally rotates?
The tibia.
Joints. We could say joints, right? But we don't want to say lower leg because that doesn't communicate who we're about to talk about in their motion. Because I know the ankle can only do so many things. I know the subtalar can only do so many things. Now, if you want to say the knee, let's talk about the knee. And notice, this is a teaching moment, right? We can't say, I'm flexing the upper arm. Upper arm doesn't flex. So we're having a knee conversation, am I correct? Okay, now ask your question again, so that everybody knows we're having a knee conversation.
So can the tibia still rotate at the knee while your hips open up? Or like if it's a closed chain movement, your foot's like planted on the ground.
Yeah.
Is it always internal rotation of the tibia at the knee?
Okay.
Open up?
So let me see if this is the question you're asking, okay? Can the knee rotate without hip motion? In other words, are they synced? Do they have to happen together? That seems to be what you're asking. Help me help you.
I mean, that's not necessarily what I mean. Like,
well, then let me know what you mean. I'm trying to. Let me peek into your mind.
Your knees still meaning rotate while your hip is externally rotating?
Hip and knee.
Or is it always?
He's torn now. He's like, because if he agrees with you, he agrees with me.
So if I stood up and I opened up my hip, I can feel it naturally externally rotate.
At your knee?
Right.
But it doesn't have to.
Well, no.
But it doesn't have to. I could put a cast. Y'all remember in Despicable Me with the freeze ray? Freeze ray! I could freeze your knee. I could freeze your knee and you could still do this all day.
Right.
Just because your knee does something doesn't mean it has to do it.
When it comes to naturally moving.
As opposed to unnaturally moving. Interesting. Can you give me an unnatural motion that we've discussed so far? So it actually, and again, help me out. I'm really trying to see what's in your mind. Just because something moves doesn't mean it has to move, and just because something else moves, that doesn't mean we can talk about it in terms of the joint that we're speaking of right now. I gave that example when I said just because my knee internally rotates, you see how my subtalar joint wants to invert and other things want to happen because they're trying to help my functional circle of reach. So, will there be a chance that when you move your hip, your knee moves too? Sure, but those are two separate conversations. Your knee doesn't have to move when you move your hip. That's what we were trying to get to, right? I can literally freeze your knee and you can still do that. But those are two separate conversations. When I try to get my arm up as high as possible, that's a lot of different conversations. How did my shoulder contribute? How did my scapula contribute? How did my trunk contribute? How did my hips contribute? Separate conversations. We analyze motion joint by joint. Now the functional task might be to grab something up top. That's a functional task. But the joints that contributed to it have to be broken down. What did your hip do? What did your knee do? What did your ankle do? What did your subtalar joint do? Now, I thought where you were going with this was, can I rotate? Because originally you started out closed chain. You said closed chain. And then all of a sudden you were like, well, do open chain, right? All right? But where I thought you were going with it is, can I rotate my knee and not move my hip? And the answer is absolutely you can. I can keep my hip here and do this. Now, do I have to? No, I can open my hip up, I can close my hip down, but these are two separate conversations. And I encourage those kinds of questions. Don't stop, man. Keep bringing it. Any other questions or clarifications? Yes, ma'am.
Can you give an example of internal rotation?
Absolutely.
Like how you show external rotation with the cut, do you have an example of like internal rotation?
Like a functional task internal rotation? Yeah, like, you know, let's say, I don't know, let's say you were stretching, right? And you were kind of like, I mean, without a straight leg, you'd have to bend it to open it up. But, you know, let's say you were, I don't know why you would do it, but let's say you were just trying to look as far back to the left as possible. And you'd have some external rotation.
External or internal?
External.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough.
No, that's what, because like right now it's externally rotated.
Yes, that's correct.
But like, is there like, I feel like internal rotation is kind of, like what are the chances of you
Not good, and you don't have, what a great question. Okay, we have more shoulder motion than hip motion, right? I mean, just naturally, right? I mean, we can do all kinds of stuff with our shoulders that we can't necessarily, I mean, I don't know, maybe some of you work at a circus and you can get your hips like way up high. I can't. And the reason is because I need to do more functional tasks that allow more shoulder motion. So think about it. If we don't need it, do you think we're going to get it? So the concept of the cut implant is what I give because that's when you need that extra motion. You're never, I say never, it doesn't make physics sense to plant on your right leg and rotate this way. You want to put force on the outside leg so that you can literally take your center of mass over your base of support and free fall back to the other side. So what you find is that, wow, I really don't need a lot of internal rotation from anatomical. So why give it if I don't need it? Now, you will have internal rotation when you come back from being external to go back home. But you are never going to be in a position where you internally rotate to change your direction. Why? Because I can't get my center of mass over my base of support. When I'm on my outside leg and I cut this way, my mass wants to fall me over, right? And I have a reflex to flex my hip and catch me before I fall. Change direction. So to your question, you don't have a lot of internal rotation from anatomical because you don't need it. Just like, I'm going to get to it, but you have a lot of ulnar deviation. You don't have a lot of radial deviation. Why? Because you need it. Don't really need this much. What a great question. Very good. And I hope I answered what your intent was, okay? Because again, guys, that's why I push you to be more clear. I just want to answer your question. And I can't answer your question if I really don't know what the heart of the question is. All great questions. Yes, ma'am.
So basically, when you're like in a closed chain movement, that's when the illusion of the joint comes out, and then
Correct. And now we can see why that illusion exists, though, because we give it a name in this open chain setting, and then our brain gets used to taking that local concept and making it global. And the illusion is, oh, cool, this is external, so anytime I see anything on the right side going this way, that must be, the same. And the illusion is just because the bottom one looks this way, the top one is actually going to do the opposite to get the same change. Very good follow-up clarification question. I commend thee. So again, Alvin, who watched the Saints game? Dude, I don't know if somebody could get me his address. I want to send Alvin Kamara an early Christmas card. That dude was insane. But again, you think of the functional task. If Alvin wants to cut and change his direction this way, he's going to plant with his outside leg. Did y'all know this? When sprinters take off on blocks, one of the reasons they do it, well, actually walking in general is controlled free fall. We let our center of mass get over our base of support, and then we catch ourselves. It's a controlled free fall. And you accentuate that free fall when you come out of the blocks, because when you let go, you fall. So cutting and planting is similar. It's a similar task where we're going to change direction by free falling the other way, and then our reflex better be quick to catch us. But it's really tough to get our center of mass to free fall if we're going in the same direction as our right side leg. In other words, I'm running, I plant, and then go that way. And so because of that torque is just rotational force. Because of that torque, when we cut and plant, if our knee didn't give a little bit, we'd rip it apart a lot more. So our knee gives for that exact reason. When we cut and plant, if we didn't give a little rotation, we'd rip it apart. And sometimes that still happens. People non-contact tears where they cut and plant, but that's rare. But if we didn't give a little bit of the knee, we'd have a heck of a lot more. Now, why don't we give a little at the elbow? Because we don't have to. We don't run on our arms and cut and plant. We give at the radioulnar joint. That's to increase our functional grip in tasks. But our elbow doesn't need to move in its transverse plane. So we don't give it. Okay, so what do we know so far? We know that the ankle is a hinge joint. Yes? Why does the ankle not have extension? Everything else has flexion extension. That's not fair. Absolutely. Two different forms of getting into a ball. Feet on the ground ball and feet off the ground ball. It's all good. How many motions does the ankle have? 2. Well, that doesn't make sense. When I was growing up, my coach always said I sprained my ankle. Coach just didn't understand that those are 2 separate articulations. Coach, mom, dad, maman, papa, bless their hearts, they don't know that, and they shouldn't. It's like saying a non-lawyer should know law. It's okay if they don't know. And I'm not telling you to be a jerk about it. Man, maman, that's wrong. Ooh, maman, don't say that. That's okay. They don't need to know, but guess who needs to know? You need to know. You need to know that underneath the ankle joint is gliding joints made up of the tarsal bones and the metatarsal bones that help to dissipate force, help to glide on uneven surfaces. When we change direction, having that subtalar joint can help keep our foot flat on the ground. Guys, that's really what it's about. That subtalar joint is so that when we're walking on uneven surfaces, my heel might glide this way, my forefoot might glide that way, to be able to keep the top part, the ankle joint, relatively balanced. Think of it like this. Your eyes, I'll end on this note, your eyes want to stay level as often as possible because that's how you collect data. That's how you process stuff. Try to walk around and do stuff like this, right? Now, 2 o'clock in the morning, Trent Festival, I understand people are like this. But my point is that you want to stay level so that you can process information and distribute. It's kind of similar to your ankle bones, the ankle joint. So the subtalar glides and shifts like shocks on a car so that the stuff above it can try to stay level. Back before we had shocks on a car, when you ate the buggies, you try to do a lot of bouncing. The shocks allow for the bottom part to kind of glide and shift and move so that you can stay smooth. That's what the subtalar joint is. It's to glide and shift and dissipate so that everything on top of it be smooth. Feedback sheets, if you want to come look at your test, make sure you sign the roll sheet. Y'all have a blessed day.